This episode is brought to you by Audi. The road is calling. Embrace the thrill of the drive with the all-new, fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron. Featuring effortless power, serious acceleration, and advanced Audi tech. It's not just a new EV. It's a new way to experience driving. The all-new, fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron is here. The next chapter of Audi starts now.
It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore.
Stephen Moore is with us, economist.
With more than 30 years experience as an economist and as a leading thinker of government on business, showing deep understanding of the shifts in the global economy. He's leading economist Steve Moore with More Money on Talk Radio 77 WABC. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Good afternoon, folks. This is the More Money Show. This is WABC Talk Radio. I am your host, Steve Moore. So honored to be in front of this microphone every Saturday afternoon between 1 and 3 p.m. Thank you so much for our regular listeners. And if you're new, I hope you enjoy the show. We try to have a lot of fun, but we also try to educate you and you educate me on what's going on with the economy, what's going on with finance, what's going on with politics. I hope you're all having a wonderful weekend, and thanks for carving out some time on your Saturday afternoon. But there's so much going on. I want to get right down to it, if I may. And I want to start with what is going on with Doge, because that is the topic of the week, and the kind of holy hell that is raining down on Elon Musk for what I think is a heroic task, which is to expose where the tax dollars are going. You know, we collect $7 trillion. I shouldn't say we collect $7 trillion. We actually collect about $5 trillion. We spend $7 trillion a year. When I first came to Washington 40 years ago, we were spending $1 trillion. Now we're at $7 trillion. Even if you account for inflation, we've doubled or tripled our spending. And I think it's a valid question that should have been asked many, many, many years ago. Where is all that money going? You know, we did this poll at the Unleash Prosperity by John McLaughlin, and if you've listened in previous weeks, I've mentioned this, that found that the average voter believes about 35 to 40 cents of every dollar that the government spends in Washington is wasted, and we don't know what happened to it. Now, if I'm asked that question, I'd say it's closer to about 30%. So that's a little bit on the high end myself. But let's say I'm right, and let's say 1/3 of the money is wasted. So we spend $7 trillion a year. If 1/3 is wasted, I think I can do this in my head. That means well over $2 trillion is going for things that don't help the American people and don't help our businesses and don't help our families. It's just self-serving spending that either goes to the blob in Washington, the bureaucracy, the swamp, or we don't even know what happens to it. There was a story last week that let me see, it was which was it, the Bureau of Labor, or I'm trying to remember which HUD, sorry. It was the Bureau of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. $2 trillion, to be exact, $1.9 trillion that they, quote, mishandled or lost control of. They don't know what happened to the money. Folks, $1.9 billion, and they can't tell us where it went? How about the story that is circulating that there are thousands and thousands of people over the age of 120 that we're sending Social Security checks to? None of these people are alive. There was one person who was over 140 years old who got a Social Security check. Now, is it that complicated to have someone check these things and say, wait a minute, if this person was born in 1880, they probably aren't alive anymore? And I mean, I laugh, but I don't know if we weren't laughing, we'd be crying about this. And it goes on. It's an epidemic of waste. And it is insulting to the American people. It's insulting to our taxpayers. It's insulting to our businesses. And this is no way to run a government. It is just patently absurd. Why are the Democrats not as angry as I am? Why are they defending waste? They defend waste. And I've asked that question to a lot of my friends and allies in this movement who know more about, how the money is spent than I do. And I have a lot of expertise on this. And I asked, why is it that they aren't outraged? Why is AOC and why is Chucky Schumer and why are all these Democrats acting like that we're the villains? We're the villains because we exposed the waste. That's, as I've been saying on some of my Fox News appearances, it's like saying, the villain wasn't Al Capone. The villain was, Elliot Ness for capturing and putting him in jail. Everything is upside down in Washington. And we are only learning what I bet every one of you already knew, that a lot of the money is just for self-serving purposes that doesn't serve the American people. And I'm so filled with examples that outrage me, but one of them is the fact that I mentioned this last week that one of the major department secretaries found that at the, it was EPA, it was Lee Zeldin, a New Yorker, who found that there was $20 billion shoveled out the door by Joe Biden right at the very, very end of his presidency so he could get the money spent. Now, first of all, how unpatriotic is that to just spend money because you want it to go to your friends and colleagues and you don't want Trump to be able to cut it? And so they just shoveled the money out as quickly as $20 billion. It's for climate change. Now, how much of that $20 billion do you think is actually going to go for the purposes of trying to deal with climate change? I guarantee you maybe, 20 million of the 20 billion. And what we discovered, and we don't know all the facts yet, folks, so don't quote me on this because we're still discovering the facts. But my friends at Fox Business News have discovered that a lot of this money went to these left-wing green energy groups that are run by people like Stacey Abrams, her from Georgia, who's just a partisan hack. And the money was then used for running TV and radio ads against Donald Trump during the campaign. Think about that. Your tax dollars, and I don't care if you're for Trump or against Trump, I don't care what party you are. If a Republican did this, I would be equally outraged. I really would. To use our tax dollars to then use for political commercials, that is illegal. It should be illegal. It should be hunted down, and these people should go to jail. And yet they did it because the money was handed to them, and they didn't think anybody was looking over their shoulder. And guess what? That's what Elon Musk and all of these auditors are doing. So one of the things we're learning about this whole process is that we can cut at least $1 trillion, at least $1 trillion. And that's being very conservative, folks. We can cut $1 trillion, but we don't have to cut the things that we want from government. We want good roads. We want good bridges. We want a good healthcare system. We want to make sure people don't go homeless. We want to make sure that people have enough to eat, that the hungry are fed. We want to make sure that we have the strongest military. And by the way, the Pentagon is just as guilty of this as any agency. I live right by the Pentagon. There's, huge numbers. Tens of thousands of people work at the Pentagon. And I bet most people have no idea what they're doing. And so I don't want to exempt Republican programs. I'm kind of upset Republicans say we spend billions and billions more on the Defense Department. Before we spend, and I'm for a strong national defense, I'm for a strong national security, but why don't we find all the craziness in the Pentagon budget, the waste there, before we give them a fatter budget? We make a mistake as conservatives of basically saying the more money we spend on defense, the safer we are. That's like saying the more money we spend on education, the better our schools are. But we know that's not true. We know that actually more spending at the Department of Education has led to worse results, not better. Now, again, I'm a military hawk. I want America to be the best, have the most mighty military force in the world. But what I'm telling you is a lot of that money gets wasted too. And so there needs to be, and Elon's just getting started, folks. That's the thing. He's just started to look under the hood. And every day it is a new outrage. And the outrage to me is that Democrats are defending the way the money is being spent. And if you believe in good government, you cannot believe in bad government. And we have bad government in Washington right now. It is a racket. And it is not helping the American people. It's helping the people in the swamp. And some of it's just complete ineptitude. So that's what we're up against, folks. And I'm going to, I've never met Elon Musk. I've shaked his hand. I've never really had a chance to talk to him. But so I don't know a lot about his personality, but I'm very impressed with what he's doing. I'm impressed by the people he's put together, and they're doing a great service to the American people. And if you're a Democrat, Republican, Independent, and you want a good government and strong government, then you should be applauding what Elon Musk is doing. I'm doing that, and I think you should too. This is the More Money Show on WABC, and we'll be right back.
Talk Radio 77 WABC.
Hey, it's Sid here for Grand Central Men's Health. Erectile dysfunction can affect your outlook on life, cause depression, and much more. They have an experienced staff who will work with you to find a treatment path that could involve a variety of treatments to have you performing like you haven't in years. There's no one-size-fits-all here. There are many different causes for ED. Can be heart conditions, diabetes, low testosterone, could be stress. There's a lot, and treatment plans vary as each patient is different. A lot of guys take pills, and every day we hear they don't work. They stop working, they worked a little, not enough, or they come with unwanted side effects. There's a lot of frustration, skepticism, and negativity around getting the help you need. Everyone will have a different medical plan for ED at our place. Call my guys today or visit them at grandcentralmenshealth.com. That's grandcentralmenshealth.com.
Would you wear the same shoes for every occasion? Or rock the same outfit 7 days a week? Of course not. Your style is better with options. Your investments could be too. SIBO Index options give you access to various contract sizes, global trading hours, and potential tax advantages. That's a good look for any portfolio. If you're ready to invest in style, head to betterwithoptions.com. There are risks associated with SIBO company products. Review the disclosures and disclaimers at SIBO.com/US_disclaimers.
This is More Money with economist Steve Moore. Now, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC Radio. Thank you so much for joining on this Saturday afternoon. My next guest is a friend and a colleague and one of the top economists in the country, David Malpass. He served the Trump administration very admirably as the head of the World Bank. And David and I talk all the time. I get so much wisdom from him. And we were talking the other day about what should we do about these foreign aid programs? What should we do about the Export-Import Bank, the World Bank, which he ran? And so he was telling me his thoughts. And I said, wait a minute, hold these thoughts, David. I got to get these on the radio with my listeners. So David Malpass, thanks for joining.
Thank you very much, Steve. That's a nice intro. It's a hugely complicated world. What do you want to know?
Okay, so let's start with, are you surprised, because you familiarized yourself greatly with the whole foreign policy and, the whole issue of foreign aid, some of it directly and some of it indirectly through the World Bank. But let's just talk about the hullabaloo about these foreign aid programs in USAID. I know a little bit about it. You know a lot more about it, but I've never seen that these programs actually lead to international development.
As I say, it's complicated, and you're right. And the more money does not mean a better outcome. And so it's a real challenge for U.S. taxpayers. Why do we put this money in if it's not really working? From the standpoint of countries, their governments love to have the U.S. engaged. And so it ends up being a foreign policy issue as well as a economic or development issue. So I think there needs to be a full rethinking of what is the goal. I think it should be clear. The goal is better outcomes for the people in those countries because that then helps the whole world And the U.S. gets markets out of that. There's benefit to us, but that's not what the programs do right now.
What do they do?
So they often hire consultants within Washington, D.C. They hire consultants in the countries themselves, and these are people that are educated at the elite universities in the U.S. and abroad, and then they design programs. But if you say, okay, how does that help a farmer? It's rare.
Right. And does it? I don't think it does. I mean, this is my frustration: is that for the first many decades of the USAID, a lot of it was for population control. They basically, I know this because I studied this when I first got into my career, that it was all about, a condom was the solution to all the problems in these countries. If they just had less kids, they wouldn't be poor. Of course, we know that was false. It seems to me they are, incidentally, the other thing, and you know more about this than I do, a lot of it, they would, because I know firsthand from people who have been involved in these programs, the USAID would come in and say, no, don't build that coal plant, use windmills or something. In other words, these desperately poor areas, they're talking about climate change, not economic development.
Yes. So there have been waves of different concepts in development of what it is. So remember the one about privatizing state-owned enterprises. That sounded good until you figured out that was a corrupt process. And look at what happened to the Soviet Union. There was a wave of saying, well, we need export-led growth. So the development assistance would come in and try to set up a business in a poor country where they could export to a wealthier country. And those businesses failed as soon as the new money stopped coming in from the development assistance. So one after another. Now, so let me shift to what might work. I think we really need to rethink on the global basis away from global organizations and more toward policies that we know work. One is sound money. Right. And so if you said U.S. government supports sound money for poor people around the world, that would be a huge hit. And it would really have value. You'd have to go up against the central banks, which is tough. They are able to make so much profit off poor people. They won't give up their monopoly.
And so I agree with you that there's kind of we've developed an international aid bureaucracy, and I'm not so sure that's really actually helping the people. Look, Americans are very generous people, and when it comes to humanitarian aid, if a country has an earthquake or a tsunami, or I think most people would agree, we should help those countries. But it's just frustrating to me after spending hundreds of billions of dollars, we just don't see results. And I've only said half-kiddingly, that if we could just teach free market economics to these countries, give them copies of Milton Friedman's Capitalism and Freedom, we do more good than all these aid programs that just give things to people and doesn't. What's the old saying? Give a person a fish and they eat for a day. Teach them to fish and they eat for a lifetime.
That's right. But, within even the conservative movement and even within us supply-siders, there's all sorts of different views of what that would look like. So I think we have to start with sound money, but also with the Laffer curve, the idea that there's a certain level of taxation above which you start losing economic growth and you lose actual revenues. And so is that accepted by the international community? That brings me to a different point, which is, I think there needs to be an even bigger picture question beyond development assistance. What about global organizations? There's been this movement over these 30 years to give more and more power to things like the G20, the group of 20 countries, which is not in the U.S. national interest. That's true also even of the World Economic Forum that meets in Davos, and they pontificate on what people should be doing, which is windmills. And they're not really on a practical basis doing any good for people in developing countries that are poor.
So you were by the way, folks, I'm talking to David Malpass, who's one of the top economists in the country. He served very honorably for Donald Trump as in many roles. He was at the Treasury Department under Trump, but then he was appointed to be the president of the World Bank. So let's talk about the World Bank. There's a lot of discussion in Washington now, David, about and you were right, obviously, on the front lines as the president of the World Bank. I don't really actually see a need for the World Bank. I don't see it doing a lot of positive things. What would you recommend that we do at this point with respect to the World Bank? Should we close it down? Should we move out of it? Or do you think it's reformable?
I think there's got to be a discussion first within the U.S. government and then with other countries about how do we adjust the concept of global institutions so it works better for the U.S. And so, you could say right off the bat, well, they should just be much, much smaller. So that's a starting point. But then I really think that you've got to build consensus among some of your friends in the world, but mostly within the U.S. itself. And that you mentioned early on, the Export-Import Bank, the Development Finance Corporation, the U.S. government itself has all these organizations that are pretty big and sprawling that have to be examined. Who are they benefiting and how? And that brings me back, I'm sorry to repeat it, but to the issue of, do you want sound money? Do you think that people around the world should have money that doesn't devalue? And if that is your starting point, you have to redo the whole system.
Could these countries, David, sorry to interrupt, but I couldn't agree with you more that sound money, you just cannot have a health economy if you don't have sound money. And would it be wise for all these countries, especially these smaller countries, to just essentially dollarize?
Freedom helps everyone. And so, yes, if they allowed people within their country to openly buy and sell dollars, that would be a huge step forward. They don't want to do that because they have a monopoly within the money, right? Central bank.
Yes. So, well, it's interesting because I was just I got back from Dubai about a week ago. I'm sure you've been to Dubai. You've been all over the world, but it was interesting to me that I could buy anything I wanted to, I could go to a restaurant, I could go to a store, I could go to the hotel. Everything was, they accepted dollars. And, I thought maybe that's part of the reason that it's there's a lot of reasons it's such a wealthy place. But I just don't understand why all these local governments have to have a currency that oftentimes isn't worth the paper it's written on.
Yeah, and we haven't talked about the IMF, but that has to be brought into the conversation. When they were set up in 1944 to protect the gold standard, it disappeared in 1971. So then what is your mission, and why is it that so many people in the world get poorer every year?
So last question I'd love to ask you about, David, is, we're being asked a lot from our listeners about what's going on with respect to Ukraine and Russia. And I'm not a foreign policy person. That's not exactly your area of expertise either. But I'm wondering, and this is just a hypothesis on my part, and I wonder how you would react to this, that it seems to me as part of Trump's strategy here is that he wants to make sure that we don't have a China-Russia alliance. And I think that Trump believes, and I believe this, that China is our real adversary. And therefore, he wants to get this war in Ukraine settled so we can really concentrate on the country that is really the potential adversary of the United States, and not China. But how do you see this geopolitically playing out?
The politics are really tough because people have been fighting this war so long. Stopping an endless war is hard. It's necessary. But I want to make a little different point that Russia is run by a dictator, and we want to decouple Russia from China. but there has to be consequences for that dictator, for Putin.
Yes.
And so one of the ways to approach this would be to write sticks and carrots to push Russia to stop the war. And then same thing on the Ukraine side, sticks and carrots to make them realize that they've got to stop, cut the best deal they can and end the war. I'll give you an example. Russia's used the vacuum, the weakness of Biden, to expand its reach all across North Africa. I think they should get out of that. There's no reason for them to be there. So that would be one of the areas where there needs to be pushback on them. They wouldn't like that because they're hoping to get all these natural resources alongside China out of Africa. So anyway, I think it's really important that the war end now. So Trump's right about that. And then there's got to be push on both of the parties to make them stop.
Yeah, I think that's sort of what Trump wants too, and so we will see how that all plays out. But David Malpass, I know it's a busy weekend for you. Thank you so much for joining us. That's David Malpass, who is the former head of the World Bank, knows more about international development than anyone I know, and always does a great job. We have him on regularly. Folks, we'll be right back. This is the More Money Show on WABC.
Talk Radio 77 WABC.
Imagine what's possible when learning doesn't get in the way of life. At Capella University, our game-changing FlexPath learning format lets you set your own deadlines so you can learn at a time and pace that works for you. It's an education you can tailor to your schedule. That means you don't have to put your life on hold to pursue your professional goals. Instead, enjoy learning your way and earn your degree without missing a beat. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
Make your next move with American Express Business Platinum. You'll get 5 times membership rewards points on flights and prepaid hotels booked on AmexTravel.com. Plus, enjoy access to the American Express Global Lounge Collection. And with the welcome offer of 150,000 points, your business can soar to all new heights. Terms apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/business-platinum. Amex Business Platinum, built for business by American Express.
It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC. I hope you're all having a wonderful weekend. My next guest is someone you all see on Fox News regularly, David Asman, who's been with... how long have you been with Fox News now, David?
Longer than probably most of your viewers have been alive. This is going into my 28th year with Fox, and then I was with the Journal for 14 years before that.
Oh my gosh, what a career! Well, that's I do not think you and I overlapped when I was at the Journal. I think at that point you had already left for the Fox News. But it is what a great combination of working for two of the greatest news outlets in America. So, David, thanks for joining. I had to get you on because you and I have smoke coming out of our ears about what's going on with this tax bill. I am frustrated. You're frustrated. Larry Kudlow is frustrated. Larry's show, of course, comes on before mine on this station. Why can't the Republicans get their act together? David, you've got a president who's very popular. He ran on making his tax cuts permanent. He won the election. We got a Republican House, Republican Senate. Everyone knows it's incredibly important for the economy. We got this done. I'm getting a little nervous about what's happening with the economy with some of the numbers that are coming out. We need a pick-me-up, and the Republicans are dithering.
Yes, I feel a little more optimistic, I think, than you do, just because of the fact that the effect that all of us are having on teaching some of these reluctant Republicans, people like Lindsey Graham and others, who simply don't understand that lowering tax rates is the key to a successful economy, and it brings in much more revenue. The idea that extending the tax cuts is going to cost anything, let alone $4.5 trillion, which is the nonsense that you're hearing from the CBO and Maya McGinnis and others inside the Beltway about the cost. The tax cuts of 2017 have brought in, as you well know, more than $1.5 trillion. That's extra revenue. That's a 48% increase, more than double the rate of inflation. So this is real money that's coming in as a result of lowering rates, increasing incentives for economic growth, more business, more people joining the workforce, paying into the tax rate, more businesses paying into the tax rate. I mean, this is precisely what we need. And if the president and the Senate and the House were to agree that we need to extend the tax cuts first thing as part of this reconciliation package, I have no doubt that the kind of market uncertainty that we're seeing right now would disappear, and there would be not only a stimulus in the corporate world and what we see in the stock market, but also in the unincorporated world, the small businesses and individuals who would be able to just keep more of their money in their pockets. So it would benefit the people that need it most right now, from the corporations to the unincorporated businesses to the individual consumers, and that would benefit everybody. But these, the president has to, I think, use an iron glove with some of these Republicans who are not willing to go along with. By the way, Rand Paul was on Larry's show, I believe it was on Thursday, and he was terrific. He said, this election was all about shrinking the government and getting the government out of our lives. He's a big libertarian. And instead, we have the Senate coming up with a spending bill. Nothing about increasing the supply side, only about growing government, when the whole election was about shrinking the government.
It's a great point. And by the way, Rand is one of my favorite senators, and because I'm pretty libertarian myself, but you're exactly right. So so our listeners know, the Senate bill does not have a tax cut, right?
It's incredible. It's absolutely
it's unbelievable.
What they are claiming is, okay, we'll sit back. We got our bill, which has our spending prerequisites on the border and on the defense and the things that are important, obviously. But at the same time, they say we're gonna wait for the House's tax cut bill, and maybe we can mesh the two together with some kind of reconciliation between the House and the Senate. All right, but you need somebody to really force their hand here. Otherwise, we're not going to get it done. Which, of course, means a big tax increase, one of the biggest ever in the history of the United States.
I'm talking to David Asman. David Asman, you know him from Fox News. He's on Fox Business. He's on Fox News Channel. He is, like myself, a former member of the Wall Street Journal editorial board. By the way, I think, David, you served for the board when the great Robert Bartley was the editor. Isn't that true?
Bob Bartley hired me in 1983, and I was there for, in fact, my entire tenure there I was under the tutelage of Bob Bartley. So he was my mentor, and just so that the audience is up to date on his importance, he turned the editorial page essentially into the blueprint for supply side economics.
He sure did.
He gave Art Laffer the credit that he deserved for coming up with the Laffer curve. He gave a blueprint to Ronald Reagan's forces, which of course included the great Larry Kudlow at the time, to come up with a tax package that led to 7 fat years where we had growth during some of those years of over 7%. The problem, and this is key, is that there were 2 years of a very deep recession when he came in, when Paul Volcker was squeezing.
I remember that
out of the economy by raising rates. That recession could have at least been minimized and maybe even avoided if the tax cuts had been implemented immediately. Instead, they made a deal with the Democrats to delay the implementation of the tax cuts for 2 years, and that was during the time in which we had the recession. And that was not a coincidence. Once the immediate effect of the tax cuts, once the tax cuts kicked in 2 years after Ronald Reagan came into office, the economy went full speed ahead, and we had 7 fat years.
Yeah, we did. And he wrote a book called The 7 Fat Years, as I recall, which was one of my favorite books. So what David Asman is telling us, folks, is very important, because the reason that he and I are so angry is that it seems like these Republicans in Congress right now, David, have not learned that lesson. And Arthur Laffer a good friend of yours and mine, makes this point all the time that I want to repeat what you just said because it's so true. We didn't need to have that deep recession in early 1982 if we had passed that tax cut more quickly and put it into effect more quickly. And the lesson there is don't wait. Get it done. I think Wall Street would go up. I think the stock market would go up 1,000 points if Republicans would just get the damn thing passed.
Again, as we saw on Friday, I mean, basically the markets are scared to death that it's not going to pass.
They are scared.
And it's not only because of the fact that if in fact these tax cuts, the 2017 tax cuts, time out at the end of this year. That's not far off the end of this year. We're already 2 months into the year, and
I know.
If they don't do this, if they don't extend the tax cuts in time, what's going to happen? We're going to have the biggest increase for 70% of taxpayers. It's not just the rich.
Yes.
70% of taxpayers benefited from the 2017 tax regime that we got with Donald Trump's first term. If that's reversed, we're just going to be devastated. And what will happen politically is that both the House and both the House and the Senate will lose their majority control, and we won't have a successful ending for the last 2 years of Trump's term.
So I wanted to bring up another one of my icons, which was Bob Novak. Did you ever know Bob Novak?
I did. He's the guy. My favorite quote from him is, "Always love your country, but never trust your government."
Yeah. Well, my favorite one of his was when he said, famously, towards the end of his life, the only reason God put Republicans on this earth is to cut taxes. And he said they can't even get that right. And so I think of that a lot now because, there's this new generation of Republicans, and many of them are my friends, and people are very well-meaning. But, David, I don't think they ever, you have to keep reteaching this supply side message to each new generation. I gave a talk to the House Republicans a month or two ago, and I was talking about what happened when Newt Gingrich was Speaker, and I'm looking around and their jaws up, and I realized not only were they not there for Reagan, they weren't even there for Newt Gingrich. In other words,
right.
So this is all new to them.
Yeah, and it's not only the so-called rhino Republicans here. I think that's kind of an unfair phrase because some of them are conservative. It's just that they don't get it. But even Margaret Thatcher, when she came in, as wonderful as she was in turning the socialism around from the decades-long socialism they had in the UK, they still didn't get supply-side economics because Reagan and Thatcher were both elected around the same time. Thatcher came in first, then Reagan. But her economic team didn't believe. They believed in cutting government, but they didn't believe that you could actually increase revenues by lowering tax rates and increasing economic activity. They were dead wrong, and they had a very slow beginning because of that. Eventually, they caught on and began to cut regulations and taxes, but not to the extent that Reagan did, and their economy did not grow to the extent that Reagan's did.
Well, I want to make sure that people understand the economic history here because it's really pretty remarkable, David. You and I lived through it. I think you might be a little older than me. I arrived in Washington in 1984. I think you started your career a little bit before I did. But I want to make sure that people remember this, do you remember, David, the top income tax rate in the United States was 70%, 70%. And in the 6 years, Reagan cut that highest tax rate from 70% to 28%. And incidentally, that bill that cut the highest income tax rate in the United States to 28% passed the United States Senate at that time 97-3. How many Democrats today would vote for a 28% tax rate?
Well, the thing about Democrats, there are some who might be teachable on that score. I would think that even Fetterman could understand stuff.
Maybe,
because his mind is not as clogged with nonsense as a lot of Republicans that are against it. But look, I don't want to leave people feeling too depressed because I do think that Trump understands it. Trump gets it. He wants one big, beautiful bill. He always has, and I think he still does. I think he's waiting to see whether or not the Senate and the House can come to some deal, because he never likes to take an extra effort unless he has to, because he's got so much on his plate. But if they don't, I think he's going to knock some heads together and get it done. He hasn't changed his mind. He's a businessman. He understands how important low taxes and regulations are to doing business, and he gets incentives. This is all about incentives. My favorite line is from Milton Friedman. The most important thing to understand about economics is incentives matter. And Trump and Reagan got that, and it's deep in their DNA. And I do think that it's going to happen, but I just think we have to keep fighting. Just keep fighting.
Yeah, we do. Well, you've been a great voice night after night on this, and so has Larry Kudlow, and so has Steve Forbes, and so have I, and we're just pounding the message. So, folks, I think the message here is very clear. We have to get the tax cut done. We have to use the current policy baseline, because it costs nothing, because all we're doing is just keeping the current policy in place. I've got about less than 2 minutes left. I want to ask you one more question, David Asman, before I let you go. What do you make of the Democrats' reaction to Doge? I look at the complete outrage of the way this money is being spent, and the Democrats outraged by the waste. They're outraged that Elon Musk is exposing the waste.
It's a clear indication that they are a part of the scam. They are. This is really a scam, and we saw it most clearly, I think, in the Stacey Abrams grant. It wasn't made specifically to her. I want to get that correct. Mm-hmm. It was made to an NGO, a non-government organization.
Yes,
$2 billion to this organization that was getting donations in the hundreds of dollars. Suddenly they get $2 billion from EPA. The spending and the waste that Doge is dragging up is more than just kind of mistakes that they make here and there. It was their modus operandi. They were rewarding their cronies, all of the people, all of the special interests that helped them get reelected, like the teachers unions, et cetera, with these multi-billion-dollar grants. There was $189 billion that went to K through 12 education as a part of various COVID packages. Where did that go? Well, now Doge is finding a lot of it was totally misspent. Doge is digging up some of the records on that. We're going to find out. But a lot of it just went to all these special interests that get these grants. And so I think the Democrats are digging their hole that they're in.
I do too.
They're stealing from the election. They're digging it deeper, and God bless them. I mean, let them keep digging. They're getting in a hole over their head.
That's David Asman, folks. You know him from Fox News. He was a long time with the Wall Street Journal editorial board, a good friend and a sound advisor. David, thanks for joining this afternoon. And folks, we'll be right back. This is the More Money Show on WABC.
Talk Radio 77 WABC.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. From your morning podcast to your afternoon playlist, State Farm knows you personalize your entire day, and that's why State Farm helps you personalize your insurance with the State Farm Personal Price Plan. It offers coverage options that help protect what you care about most at an affordable price just for you. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Prices vary by state. Options selected by customer. Availability and eligibility may vary.
Every cup of Nespresso coffee is an invitation to transform your morning routine into a ritual you can treasure each and every day. Using the Virtuo Pop, a simple touch of the button freshly brews bold aromas and a rich, velvety crema layer for delicious cafe-quality coffee at home. Whether you enjoy your coffee hot or over ice, every sip, every morning is unforgettable. Nothing tastes like Nespresso coffee. Visit Nespresso.com or our app to explore our full range of easy-to-use machines and coffees not found anywhere else.
It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore.
Stephen Moore is with us, economist.
With more than 30 years experience as an economist and as a leading thinker of government on business, showing deep understanding of the shifts in the global economy. He's leading economist Steve Moore with More Money on Talk Radio 77 WABC. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC. I hope you're having a wonderful Saturday afternoon. Thanks for joining. I always say that I have the smartest audience on radio, and I know that because I take your calls. Most weeks we will not be taking your calls today because we have such a busy show and so many great guests coming up. But I appreciate when you do call in, and next week I will take your calls, but not this week because of so many great guests that we were able to round up on the Saturday afternoon. I wanted to bring up a couple of issues that are hot on my mind right now, and I'm curious about what you think about these. I think one of them, I am worried about the inflation rate, folks. If you look at what's happened to the index of what's happening with commodity prices, if you look at what's happening with corn and cotton and coal and natural gas, and if you look at wheat and all of these various types of aluminum prices, steel prices, they've been going up, and they've been going up a lot. And they've been up about 11 or 12% since the Fed started lowering interest rates, which I actually think might have been a mistake. And I see no case, unfortunately. I know Donald Trump wants lower interest rates. I don't see the case for it right now. I think prices are continuing to rise. Right now, by my latest estimates, prices are rising at 5%. On an annualized basis. That's bad. That's a bad number. All of that happened under Biden. And if you're a regular listener of this show, you know why the prices are up. It's because Biden spent so much money, so many trillions of dollars. And by the way, Donald Trump is not a fiscal saint either. I want to be fair here. Both parties are responsible for this outrageous budget that we have right now. But Biden will go down in history, no question, as our most financially irresponsible president in the history of the country. Well, I shouldn't say that because I can't say about presidents in the 19th century. I don't know all my history of some of those presidents, but certainly in my lifetime, there's nobody that's been worse than Joe Biden. And he spent money like it was candy, like it was passing out M&Ms to kids in a schoolyard. And we're paying a dear, dear price for that. And let's hope we never do that again. And I know we have a lot of Democrats to listen to the show, and I so much appreciate when independents and Democrats listen to the show, because I'm not a rah-rah Republican, and I'm not here to defend the Republicans. But the bill that the Republicans just passed in the Senate actually increases spending. I don't get that. I mean, yes, we have to secure our border. Yes, we want a strong defense, but my God, can't we cut spending rather than keep increasing it? And so one of the issues that is driving inflation, other than the fact that Joe Biden spent all this money, is that egg prices are up. And this is a heck of a story. I get asked about this all the time. Why is it that a dozen eggs used to cost, less than $2, and now in many places a dozen eggs can cost $7, $8. I had one caller tell me $9 they spend for a dozen eggs, and so why is that? Well, I think most of it is because we had to. At least we're told that we had to kill millions and millions and millions of chickens because of the bird flu, and so the price went way up for eggs. But it's ironic that the Democrats are pointing at Trump saying, you're the one who's responsible for the egg prices. And so there was a really interesting study that showed that we had this in our hotline. If you're not getting our hotline, folks, please get it. Go to unleashprosperity.com, sign up for it. It's free. It's a little newsletter that comes out every morning. I think you'll enjoy it. You can read it in 5 minutes. It just has bullet points about what's going on. But we tell the truth. It's not fake media. It's not fake news. It's the true news. And a lot of it is just a graph or a chart, very simple. You don't have to be an economist to understand this stuff. And so here's the truth about egg prices. 92.2% of egg price increases happened under Joe Biden. 92.2%. 7.8% of the increase in the egg prices has happened under Donald Trump. By the way, when in his first term, there was no increase in the egg prices. And yet, here's the kicker, okay? Almost all of the news stories about high egg prices have happened under Trump. And he's only been in office for a month. And so the media didn't cover this story when Biden was president. They didn't want to blame the high egg prices on him. But as soon as Trump comes in, all of a sudden, what's going on with these egg prices? Well, exactly, folks, exactly. This is the media bias. I've never seen anything like it before. And I shouldn't say I've never seen anything like it because we see this kind of thing all the time. But this is so blatant. So even though 90, let me get that number again, 92, I want to be accurate here. Yeah, 92.2% of egg price increases happened under Joe Biden. 7.8% happened under Trump, but it's all Donald Trump's fault. You just cannot make up this stuff, folks. And it's quite annoying to me, actually. I find it to be so frustrating that this is happening. Now, the other story that I wanted to mention to you that has me a little bit angry is that, and I mentioned this earlier, but it's worth mentioning again. We spend right now 1.62. No, I'm sorry. That's the number for 2030. Right now we spend $1.21 trillion a year on welfare programs. $1.21 trillion a year. Now hold that number in your head for just a minute. Now I'm going to tell you what happened with respect to the welfare. And what this shows is that with $1.2 trillion that we spend, by the way, that's $31,000 for every welfare recipient, $31,000 per welfare recipient. And what this shows, this is from my friends at Epic. They are the budget watchdog group in Washington called Epic. Go to their website. They have great material. So what they tell us is even though we're spending $1.2 trillion, $31,000 per welfare recipient, if we just gave that money out in cash, just gave it in cash to every family under the poverty level, we'd only have to spend $16,000 per family, but we're giving them we're spending $31,000. So I want to make this very clear. With $16,000 just passing out to people under the welfare, under the poverty level, we could just pull everybody up above the poverty level, but we spend $31,000 and yet we still have 37 million people in poverty. You cannot make this stuff up. So where did all that money go? Where did over half of the money go to the big welfare state, all these programs? And the answer is it went to the people who run the programs. It didn't, a lot of it just didn't, it went to this big blob of the welfare state. The people run the programs, and that is sinful. And so, as we said in the hotline this Friday, a lot of people are doing really well with welfare. The problem is it's not the poor people. It's not the people who are poor that are getting this money. It's the programs it's the people run the programs. This is why Washington is such a sinister town. It's why 3 of the 5 wealthiest counties in America are in Washington, because the money comes in, but it doesn't all go out. We take 20% carrying costs. And, when you spend, let's just do the math here. We spend $7 trillion a year. If 20% of the money never goes back outside the Beltway, that's $1.4 trillion gift that you all outside the Beltway are giving us inside the swamp. And then you wonder why the swamp creatures are so large. So I think you understand what's going on here. It's just a big racket, and it is not working for the American people. And that's just one program, by the way. We could easily cut our healthcare costs by 30%, not cutting Medicare benefits, not cutting veteran benefits, just providing a better system of paying for healthcare, and we don't do anything about it. So, folks, our government is wrecked, and the only guy who can actually fix this, and I hope he does, and he's on his way to fixing it, is Donald Trump. But the cavalry is finally here. It's going to take a little while to fix these problems. But God, how do you spend twice as much money in welfare as you need to, and still we've got all these people in poverty? It's sad, but it's not a joke. These are the real figures. I'm sorry, I'm just speechless on the absolute insanity of what's happening in Washington. This is the More Money Show, folks. We'll be right back.
Talk Radio 77 WABC.
This episode is brought to you by Nerds Gummy Clusters, the sweet treat that always elevates the vibe. With a sweet gummy surrounded with tangy, crunchy Nerds, every bite of Nerds gummy clusters brings you a whole new world of flavor. Whether it's game night, on the way to a concert, or kicking back with your crew, unleash your senses with Nerds gummy clusters.
This episode is brought to you by Abercrombie. There's nothing better than the perfect jean and going out top combo, or an outfit that perfectly matches your plans. Abercrombie's relaxed jean goes with every occasion. Date nights with something lace, or daytime with a cozy sweater. And their barrel jean will surprise you. It's the trend that will become a staple in your wardrobe. Abercrombie denim comes in tons of rises, fits, and washes. Find your perfect pair online or in store.
This is More Money with economist Steve Moore. Now, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show. This is WABC. I am your host, Steve Moore. Thanks so much for joining. I always say this. I'm not the best radio talk show host, but I do get some of the best some of the best guests in the business. And my next guest is a guy who's been a friend of mine and a crusader for freedom and the right to work and the right to prosper in this great country of ours, Mark Mix, who runs the Right to Work Foundation. Mark, thanks for joining and thanks for everything you do.
Well, Steve, thank you. You have been a leader and you're indefatigable in your fight for liberty and freedom. So I appreciate it. That took me a while to get that one out. That's a big syllable word for me, but thanks. It's good to be with you. Good to be with you.
You too. And so Mark and I have worked side by side on so many issues over the years. So I'm just thrilled to have him on. So Mark, I'm going to start with just a big, broad question, if I may, because you're the expert on labor and we all want American workers to be the best, highest paid, most productive workers in the world. And for the most part, they are. So what is the difference, Mark, between being pro-worker and pro-union?
Well, Steve, that is a really important question. It's extremely relevant right now as the new administration takes over and as you advise them. I mean, here's the difference. I mean, the ideological power of organized labor officials is really growing really distant from the views of rank and file workers across the country. And we saw that in this last election. Steve, if you look at the numbers, 62% of the Teamsters, according to Sean O'Brien, the Teamster president, voted for Donald Trump. And we know this. If you look at the private sector workforce, Donald Trump got a large majority of union households to vote for him in this last election. However, when you look at the money that's distributed from labor union officials and their political action committees and their general treasury funds, the Open Seekers just released the numbers. $60 million went directly to Kamala Harris, $284,000 to Donald Trump. So that's the best example of the disconnect between union officials and the rank and file workers they claim to represent across the country. And that's growing wider and wider over time. And Steve, as you know, we're down to about 5.9% of workers, private sector workers in America are members of unions. So their product they're selling is not something that workers are buying, that's for sure. But yet the political ideas of Donald Trump and the policy ideas of Donald Trump and this new Congress are attracting workers, like secure the border, lower taxes, lower regulation. You're the expert on those areas, Steve. Keeping men's out of women's bathrooms. That's bread and butter for union households and working Americans. And union officials are way out of touch. And that's being exposed dramatically right now.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I think you've really nailed it, my friend. And if someone wants to voluntarily join a union, that's fine. I don't have a problem with it. I do believe in the right of association, and the right of association means if a bunch of workers want to get together and collectively bargain with the employer, I think they have every right to do so. What really bothers me, Mark, and you and I have talked about this over the years, is this idea that, to get a job, you would be forced to join the union. And we've been talking about this for 35 years, but it still happens in a lot of states.
Yeah, indeed. And Steve, despite the position you've been in, whether it be at the Wall Street Journal, whether it be at you building organizations, or whether you being at the Committee to Unleash Prosperity now, you have been a proponent of that individual freedom. And I agree with you. That's exactly right. And federal law protects workers' rights to join unions, to associate if they want to voluntarily do that. Unfortunately, the labor policy from the 1930s includes that provision that force and coercion are really the bias in federal law. And that's what we've been fighting against all these years. And, I think union officials, if they just look at it realistically, look at the numbers, look at the people that want to be in unions. I mean, Gallup does a poll each year saying, 70% of people have a favorable opinion of unions, just like you, Steve. But when you ask them if they are interested in joining, it goes down to like 10% of people that are interested in joining. And that's probably because of the disconnect in the political world. You think Randy Weingarten, think Sean Fain, think these, kind of these television symbols on TV running these unions. They're really out of step and out of touch with the American worker and, frankly, Americans in general.
So I'm a little nervous, Mark. I'm talking to Mark Mix, who is the venerable president of the National Right to Work Foundation. By the way, who was it? Who was it before you who actually kind of built this whole movement? It was I'm blanking on his name.
Yeah.
Oh, Reed Larson. What a great American he was, and I know he taught you well because you've done an amazing job keeping his legacy alive. So let's turn to what's happening in 2025, because there's a lot of labor issues that I've been meaning to talk to you about. One is that I'm not happy about this labor secretary. I'm nervous about the fact that she seems to not be in favor of right to work. What do you think? Tell us about this woman, and maybe I'm wrong, but what do you think?
Well, Steve, no, there is a real problem here, and she is a one-term congresswoman from Oregon.
What is her name again, Mark?
Lori Chavez DeRemer is her name.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And she was one of 3 Republicans to co-sponsor the PRO Act. And Steve, you and I have had conversations not on the radio, but you and I have had conversations about the PRO Act. And the PRO Act, first and foremost, was a bill pushed by union officials and by then President Joe Biden. And the primary objective, number one thing it would do first and foremost, is repeal all the right to work laws across the country. I mean, it's a federal reimposition of forced unionism on those 26 states that have passed right to work laws over the last several years. So that in and of itself was enough to be against Lori Chavez DeRemer and question her views on individual freedom in the workplace that Donald Trump has articulated, over the last, 8 years now. So that was very concerning. The PRO Act goes beyond that, though, Steve, and it says that, it's going to redefine independent contractors to employees. We've talked about that in the past, too, where the idea is if you can't unionize independent employee or independent contractors, but you can unionize employees. She was for that. Mm-hmm. She was for the federal imposition of government union bargaining on the entire land. There was a bill introduced that said the federal government would audit the states, and if they didn't meet 4 core standards when it came to unionization of government employees, the federal government would impose that on the states. That's not what we need to do, Steve. You and Art Laffer do your rich state, poor state studies every year, and you show that labor policy and other economic policies are very important, and the laboratories of the states prove that these things make a difference. And the idea that you would impose forced unionization on government employees from the federal level to the state level is something that really, I don't think Donald Trump or anyone Americans really support that, except for a few union officials here in Washington, D.C.
That's Mark Mix, who's the president of the Right to Work Foundation. And I Mark, we have a lot of union members who are listening to this show right now. So, we both, if you're hardworking union members are, the backbone of our economy. I think it's unfair that people should be forced to join unions against their will. And that's what the labor bosses want. Now, there was an interesting development. I don't know if there's 2 interesting developments in our last few minutes, Mark, that I wanted to talk to you about. One is you wrote to me a week or 2 ago about the fact that we might be able to get New Hampshire to be a right to work. To remind our listeners, what is it? About 25 states are right to work, and about 25 states. What is the balance right now?
Yeah, current count is 26 right to work states. And unfortunately, Steve, we lost the bill in the New Hampshire legislature last week.
No.
Yeah, it's a 400-member legislature. I think it's like the 3rd largest legislative body in the world. And everybody in New Hampshire knows their state representative because they probably live next door. The vote was 200 to 180. We lost 25 Republicans on the vote. It was almost perfect attendance, which is really rare in the New Hampshire legislature. But we have another bill pending in Montana. We just got the bill introduced out there. We're going to hopefully get a vote on that one. We've been working in Utah. We've been working in a few other states. And And we've been fairly successful, but New Hampshire is one we're going to have to tee up again and go after it again, and we'll just keep at it until freedom reigns in New Hampshire.
Now, the other state that I'm keeping an eye on is, Wisconsin. I got a note from our friend Scott Walker, who was the governor there, saying he's nervous about what's happening there with respect to some of the rule changes that happened in Wisconsin. How concerned are you?
Very, very concerned. And see, that's going to be a major fight as we head toward April in an election for a Supreme Court justice in Wisconsin. Scott Walker saved taxpayers in Wisconsin about $30 billion by signing Act 10, which was a reform of the unionized bargaining system in Wisconsin. The judge now there, the election last year changed the complexion of that court. There's another election up right now. And if it goes poorly, it's very clear that the Supreme Court in Wisconsin will strike down Act 10, and then most likely they will go after the right to work law as well, saying it's unconstitutional. I mean, both the Act 10 and the right to work law in Wisconsin that passed in 2015, I believe it was, Scott Walker signed the right to work law, were litigated in the Seventh Circuit. They were litigated in the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and both measures were upheld by the courts at that time. However, as you get a political change, obviously they relitigate, and here we are. A judge in Dane County has already struck down, quote unquote, Act 10. Obviously, the appellate court will hear it. The good news is that the expedited review that the unions wanted to get to the Supreme Court right away got denied. So there's going to be time to litigate it. But the election results in Wisconsin for that Supreme Court seat are going to make a huge difference on the future of that state.
One last point, Mark, that I wanted to bring up about Wisconsin, because it's sort of relevant about what's going on today. I'm sure you recall what happened when Scott Walker passed many of his reforms. The unions stormed the Capitol. Remember that? And they were camped out there for, I think it was at least a week. And Scott Walker's life was in danger. And I think about this in the context of what happened on January 6th, and I'm not. If anybody went into the Capitol, I think they probably deserve to be prosecuted. But Mark, no one was prosecuted in Wisconsin.
Yeah, that's right. Steve, these are unfortunate stories, but you're right. I mean, Indiana as well. When we passed the right to work law in Indiana in 2012, there were literally, I think, 7,000 to 10,000 union militants outside the Capitol, and they forced their way in. State police had to be called. It's really a sad story.
It's a double standard. It's a double standard.
Indeed it is. Indeed it is. Yeah.
So last question, we got about 30, 45 seconds left before we have to take a hard break. Mark Mix, are you optimistic about the future of the American worker?
I am, Steve. I'm optimistic because I listen to you and Art Laffer and others talk about tax reform and regulatory reform and the things that could happen in the country if we could just bring a little more freedom and a little more control over this federal leviathan. And that includes compulsory unionism. If we can roll that back, then I think there's good wins headed for the United States for the next several years.
Well, Mark, I love it because, the statistic that you cited earlier, 94% of Americans are not in a union. So unions are not the powerhouse politically that they once were, and too often they don't really represent their members. Thanks so much for joining, Mark Mix, and we'll be right back. This is the More Money Show on WABC.
Talk Radio 77 WABC.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
I think I just won my taxes.
Yeah?
I just switched to H&R Block in about 1 minute. All I had to do was drag and drop last year's return into H&R Block, and bam, my information is automatically there.
So I don't have to go digging around for all my old papers to switch?
Nope.
Sounds like we just leveled up our tax game.
Switching to H&R Block is easy. Just drag and drop your last return. It's better with Block.
It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC. I hope you're having a wonderful weekend in the last weekend of February. My next guest is one of my heroes, one of my all-time heroes, and a colleague and somebody who has made such a difference in terms of spreading freedom and prosperity throughout not just the country, but the world. I'm talking about Steve Forbes. Steve, thanks for joining. As always, so much to talk to you about. A bit of frustration in my voice because what's happened with the tax bill. You wrote a piece, an excellent piece just the other day, saying, what are these people waiting for? Why are the Republicans flinching here? What in the world is going on, Steve Forbes?
What's going on is we show ourselves to be a party. I hate to say this, especially on the air, but the Republicans have the nickname of being the stupid party. Mm-hmm. And I think this is going to be a case where the president's going to have to weigh in, crack the whip, and get this thing moving. As you well know, if we don't get a big, beautiful tax cut soon, we're going to have a troubled economy, and we're going to do poorly in the midterm elections. So America's going to lose. The Republicans are going to lose. And what's so strange about it, Steve, is that the Republicans can set their own rules, the Budget Committee. The CBO has no constitutional authority over them, so they can put any numbers they want. And as you know, they have a crazy 1.8% growth rate assumption, which the whole purpose of a tax cut is to increase that, which is good. And our friends in the blue states who are worried about SALT, well, there are two brackets in the tax code, not to get nerdy, but there's important two brackets to hit most of those people. They're 22% marginal rate and the 24% marginal rate. The 22, I think he hit around a couple around 96, 97,000. Mm-hmm. The other
lower that rate.
And so why not just take those two brackets and knock them down to 15%? And I love it. And that way they do better than trying to increase SALT to 20 or 30,000. And it's good for growth. It incentivizes growth, removes a barrier to growth. Capital gains. What is their allergy to cutting the capital gains tax? Which we know not only helps the economy, but also raises revenue instantly. People realize gains instantly. So I don't know what goes through these people's minds, why they put artificial constraints on themselves. And we need a bill that is powerful, especially with uncertainty about the world, uncertainty about tariffs. We need some real juice here, and they're giving us water.
So a couple of issues that you brought up that I wanted to amplify. One is on the capital gains. I think about my parents who bought a property back in the early 1960s for $25,000, and then by the time they retired and wanted to sell the property, it was worth maybe $600,000. But there was huge inflation over that period, Steve. So they did make a gain on it, but about half of the gain was just due to the fact that the prices had risen, and yet they had to pay a capital gains tax on mostly inflationary gains. How in the world is that fair?
It isn't. And the idea that it helps the rich, sure, but it helps everyone else. You mentioned the housing. And it helps when you have a sensible tax system. It helps the stock market. And whether you're directly an investor, but most everyone, tens of millions of people are in pension plans, IRAs, and things like that. And why in the world wouldn't we want policies that increase the value of those assets, which means you get more in retirement? And it just is bizarre.
So another one, and this was something that was brought up by one of my callers a week or two ago, and I was thinking of you when they reminded me of this, which is, let's say that you own, stock in Walmart, let's say, and you've got a big gain in Walmart, but you think you've got a new company that's coming along, and you think this is a company in artificial intelligence that could be the next Walmart or the next Google, and so people want to sell their Walmart stock, Steve, and they might want to get into an AI company or a robotics company, and a lot of exciting things going on in that industry. So let's say you sell a couple $100,000 worth of stock in Microsoft or Walgreens or Walmart, and then you buy this stock in artificial intelligence. So you have to sell the stock. Why should you have to pay a capital gain, Steve, if you're just reinvesting the money in another company?
Well, that brings up a very important point, and it also gets to the fact you want capital to be mobile.
Yes.
You don't want these things artificially frozen.
That's right.
Like what happens when you have rent control, or what happened when they jiggered interest rates, so people, they don't want to lose their 2% mortgage, so they're stuck in their house. So you want mobility, and this way, having a low or no rate, or as you put it, if you reinvest it, that's what you want, people to going to new opportunities instead of making everything frozen.
Yeah, and it's so this is called rollover, and I believe the law should be changed so that if you make a profit in owning one stock, but then you just simply change the owner. So in other words, just you're reinvesting in something else. So you haven't taken any money out of the economy. It makes no sense to me, Steve Forbes, why that would be taxed. Now, you and I had a piece.
By the way, mutual funds. The old kind, but not the ETFs, but mutual funds. If you hold a mutual fund, each year you get a bill for if they have capital gains.
It's ridiculous.
And so, just if you're rolling it over, it should be like an IRA or 401k. Let it grow. We want growth.
So you and I had a piece the other day that we co-authored on a really important subject, which is this electromagnetic spectrum, which is how we get radio transmission and transmissions on our computers and our TVs and all of these things. And it's very valuable. And so the federal government owns this, and we want the federal government to. They don't need it all, and the private sector, these companies like AT&T and Verizon and a lot of the artificial intelligence companies need that spectrum so they can move forward with their products and provide these products to American people. We should auction that spectrum off to the highest bidder, and we could raise, Steve Forbes, as much as $100 billion, and we could use that as an offset on the budget to bring our debt down and our deficit down. Shouldn't that be done?
To ask the question is to answer it. But lobbying is preventing that, and it just shows how screwed up the system is. If somebody puts a spoke in, the whole vehicle stops. And yes, we've done auctions before. It's not as if we're doing something brand new. It's been done many times before. And as you say, it's a piece of property. Let those who think they can put it to productive use. The government gets money, but people are buying it because they think they can create resources that they can make a profit on, and the American people have better service. So it's a bizarre thing, and it just goes on, and it's like whack-a-mole. Find one crazy thing out pops another.
Well, it is. And, we wouldn't have led the technology revolution over the last 30 years if we had just hoarded the spectrum. Part of the problem, frankly, is some of the government agencies like the Defense Department, which owns some of the spectrum, they don't want to give any of it up. It's just they just want to keep it because they have it. Now, of course, we want the Defense Department to have the spectrum they need, but there's a lot of it they don't need, and they're just hoarding it.
Well, it's like land that you don't use. I mean, it just lies fallow. Let's put it to productive use. And the thing is, people are willing to pay for the privilege of doing it. So everyone comes out ahead. It's
a win-win-win. Same thing, by the way, we have a new study at Unleash Prosperity, and Steve Forbes is one of our founders, that shows that we have, are you ready for this, Steve? $12 trillion of mineral resources. And these are recoverable with existing mining technologies. And instead, we have to get our minerals from Ukraine and from Russia and China and these other countries. Some of this stuff, as you said, doesn't make any sense.
Well, and the thing is, as you know, the biggest landowner in the country is the federal government. And back in the 1800s, when they weren't hoarding everything, millions of people were able to buy land on the cheap. That's how we settled the West.
Yes.
And so people say, oh, we can't sell the lands. We're not talking about selling Yellowstone Park or things like that. So instead of selling it, do what the Brits have done, buy a 99-year lease and put this to work. And all you have to do is just look at the Middle East. Israel is in a desert, and we know deserts aren't very good for water. But Israel has, thanks to technology, Israel has no water problem, and they use it very, very judiciously. And so all this desert land we have in Nevada and elsewhere, people say, well, it's worthless. Well, it looks worthless, but remember, oil was once just glop in the ground. It was human ingenuity that turned that glop into something the modern world can't live without. So and remember, Las Vegas is on sand, seemingly once worthless sand. So let people put things to productive use. And by using the leasing system, people will get over the hang-up, oh, you're selling the government patrimony. No, you're letting people create assets where there are none before.
You know, it's so funny you should say that. I just got back about a week and a half ago from Dubai. I don't know if you've been to Dubai, Steve, but, you know, it's amazing. You see, you know, it looks like Manhattan with, 100 skyscrapers. And here's a place 50 years ago was all sand. And it just shows what human ingenuity and building and investment can do. And by the way, they are essentially dollarized there, and so they have a stable currency. And I wonder why it is that you have a city like that is safe and clean and efficient. And then I go to my hometown of Chicago or New York, and it doesn't seem to be working. And it's just bad government seems to interfere with our lives in ways that are so detrimental.
Well, that's the thing. And one of the things that's been a virtue of this country is it's not that we don't make mistakes or have periods of stagnation, but it's the ability to renew ourselves.
Yes.
I'm old enough to remember the 70s, malaise and all of that, perpetual inflation. And then we had the booming 80s and high tech and everything else that's flowed from it. So I hope we're in a period of renewal. And
I hope so too.
And that's why I hope they do right on tariffs. We won't get into that now, but
that's for next week, Steve.
Yeah, and but the tax bill, that should be a no-brainer. And if they don't get a big stimulative tax bill giving cuts to everybody, big ones, we're going to have a troubled economy. And as you know, in 2017, the bill was passed late, so we lost a year. But it came before any uncertainties about tariffs or anything else. So you had growth.
We did.
Growth. You got the stimulus in. And that's why we need to get the stimulus in now, which our senators don't seem to realize. And some of our friends, I put quotation marks around friends, in the House, don't seem to grasp. Without prosperity, you guys are toast.
Well, if we can get to 3% growth, we just ran these numbers just last week. If we get to 3% growth, right now we're at less than 3. We're at about 2. We can start to bend that debt curve down just by growing the economy and people paying more taxes because they're making more money and more people are working.
Absolutely, it's creating resources, and plus it does two things. One, the mood of the country changes. That's always good. But also, it's a real-life big example for places like Europe and Japan, which are stagnating because of crazy policies. And just as in the 80s, when Reagan cut tax rates, 50 countries followed suit. And so we got to be the example of positive growth. And then the world
Steve Forbes,
a better place.
Thank you so much. That's Steve Forbes, one of the most brilliant economic minds in the country. Always privileged to have you on the show, Steve. This is the More Money Show, folks, on WABC, and we'll be right back.
Radio 77, WABC. This is More Money with economist Steve Moore. Now, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show. I appreciate everyone joining us this afternoon. Had an amazing show today with my friend Mark Mix of Right to Work and Steve Forbes and David Asman. of Fox News. We get wonderful guests, so I want to thank them for coming on. Just a couple of things I wanted to say in our closing minutes for the show. Number one, if you get the hotline, if you don't get the hotline, please sign up, folks. Just go to unleashprosperity.com and sign up for our daily hotline and a little newsletter that will come right to your email every morning. I think you'll really enjoy it. You can read it in 5 to 10 minutes. My producer, Jackson Avery, is sitting next to me, and he is a key part of getting that out every morning. But I think if you want to be the smartest person in the room, get the hotline. And one of the things we do in the hotline is we always have a humor item at the end of the hotline every day. And there was just a great cartoon that just really explained the problem with the Democratic Party. And I'm not a rah-rah Republican. You know that, folks. Sometimes I pull my hair out about what the Republicans are doing too. But this cartoon had these two donkeys behind the wheel of a car, and they're talking to each other. And what you see is that they're just going around in a circle. They just keep driving around in a circle. And the one donkey says to the other, "I'm using the GPS, and it just keeps telling me to turn left, turn left, turn left." Well, that is the Democratic Party today. All they want to do is turn left. They're not moving to the middle. And I wish they would, by the way. I want two competitive parties. I don't want to cede all of the land to the Republicans. Where are the Bill Clinton Democrats? Where are the Clintons who believed in, like John F. Kennedy, cutting taxes and strong national defense and standing up for the American people? And that just doesn't exist today. There are some Democrats who do want to do that, and they need to be elevated in the party. But right now, the front runner for the Democratic Party today, again, I always say this, I don't know if I should laugh or cry, but the front runner right now is Gavin Newsom of California, who's ruined his state. He's burned his state. He's bankrupted his state, and he's the best the Democrats can do. No, we need a new Bill Clinton. And I didn't like Bill Clinton's personal behavior all the time, but we balanced the budget when Bill Clinton was president. He was a pretty fiscally responsible guy. I just wish there was somebody out there that could fill that vision of a kind of centrist Democratic Party. It would be good for the country. The last thing I wanted to bring up is we've been talking throughout the show about the waste in government, the fact that nobody knows where the money is being spent. Nobody can account for where it goes. It has gone on and on. $10 billion a year for empty office buildings. The fact that we've had all these federal employees who haven't been showing up to work. And I think Trump is right. If they don't want to show up from work, then that's their human right. But we don't have to pay them. And I'm watching these sob stories by federal employees, and I don't like it when someone loses a job. I've lost a job, and it's a painful experience. But it happens. It's just life. It's life. And yet these federal employees, oh my God, I don't know how I'm going to do it. I've been working for the federal government for 25 years, and I don't have money. And I said, wait a minute. These people are getting 8 months, many times 6 to 8 months of severance pay. Nobody in the private sector gets 6 to 8 months of severance pay. And then they get this huge retirement benefit. So they get a sweet deal. And in the private sector, people do lose their jobs. Sometimes the factory goes out of business. Sometimes they're just not doing a good job and they get fired. As I said, I've been fired from jobs before. And why is it that the federal workers should be inoculated from the real world? They're living in a bubble. And these people are saying, oh, gee whiz, this is going to be such a hardship for my family. And it will be. But you know what? If they're competent people and they want to work hard, there are jobs out there in the private sector for these people. Somebody sent me a little cartoon saying, that now that all these illegal immigrants are leaving these jobs, maybe we can take these federal employees who lost their jobs and put them in those jobs, which is an interesting idea. Folks, I just so much enjoy being in front of this microphone every Saturday afternoon with you. I just want to say again how much I appreciate the letters and the emails. And sometimes when I'm just walking down the streets of Manhattan, people will come up to me and say, hey, I love listening to the More Money Show. Thank you. Thank you. It means the world to me that you listen. And I love the positive feedback. And we will be back next week, same bat time, same bat channel on the More Money Show on WABC.
Talk Radio 77 WABC.